Imagine signing a contract, right? But not by putting a pen to a piece of paper.
Right, no pens at all.
Yeah, no pens. You basically take a cow and you slice it completely in half.
Just right down the middle.
Exactly, right down the middle. And then you lay the bloody halves on the dirt.
It's a pretty graphic image.
It really is. And then you walk between them. And the entire time you're walking through that blood, the unspoken agreement hanging in the air is basically, if I break the terms of this deal, may what happened to this animal happen to me.
Yeah, may I be torn apart.
Right. And that is exactly how the ancient world signed their most important documents.
It's just visceral. I mean, it's an almost terrifying image for a modern reader.
Totally.
Because we're so used to, digital terms and conditions. We just blindly click accept on our screen.
I do it every day. I don't read a single word.
Exactly. And because of that, we've completely lost the life and death weight of what an ancient agreement actually entailed.
Which is exactly why we're diving into this today. So, welcome to this deep dive into the source material.
It's great to be here.
For you listening, our mission today is to completely reframe how you look at a massive, ancient, and honestly, often intimidating text.
Oh, very intimidating for a lot of people.
Yeah. We are exploring a comprehensive survey of biblical covenants, and our goal isn't just to cherry pick an isolated story or like an inspiring proverb,
Right. We're not just looking for life quotes today.
No, definitely not. We are tracking what theologians and scholars actually call the canonical spine of the entire Bible.
I love that phrase, canonical spine.
It's so good. It's basically the organizing grammar, the architectural blueprint that holds the whole thing together.
Yeah. From the very beginning of the universe to the end of the world.
Exactly. So let's start there. What is that architectural blueprint, really?
Well, it's this concept of the covenant. When you begin to understand the mechanics of how covenants actually functioned, back in the ancient Near East, the Bible completely transforms.
It stops being just a random collection of stories.
Yeah, totally. It stops being this murky, chaotic collection of random agricultural laws and ancient genealogies that no one can pronounce.
Or like disconnected miracles, right?
Exactly. It snaps into focus as a highly unified, intensely cohesive narrative.
Okay, so what's the core premise we're looking at today then?
Distilled down to its absolute essence, it is this God saves by covenant.
God saves by covenant. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, he initiates the relationship, right? He structures the obligations. He judges based on that framework. And he preserves his people through it.
So it's like the rule book and the safety net all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, he fulfills his promises within it. It's the underlying mechanism that really makes sense of everything else.
Like the priests and the kings and all that.
Yes. The priesthood, the kings, the animal sacrifices, the prophets, it all literally hangs on this one framework.
Okay, but before we start tracing that timeline for you listening, I feel like we really need to establish a baseline.
You definitely need some definitions.
Yeah, because if covenant is the grammar of the entire text, we need to know what that word actually means.
Right, because it doesn't mean what we think it means today.
Exactly. In the 21st century, when I hear the word covenant, my brain immediately just translates that to contract.
Sure, like a legal document.
Yeah, I think about going to buy a car, I sit in a sterile office, I sign 30 pieces of paper I barely understand to agree to some financing plan.
And then they hand you the keys.
Right. And it's cold. It's highly transactional. The moment either of us breaches the terms, the lawyers step in or, the car just gets repoed.
It's a pure exchange of goods and services.
Exactly. So are we just talking about an ancient version of a car loan here?
No, not even close. A contract is a binding agreement, yes, but an ancient covenant is a totally different species of relationship.
Okay, so how does the source material define it based on the historical data?
Based on the linguistic and historical data, a covenant in this context is a binding, oath-shaped relationship.
Oath-shaped. I like that.
Yeah. It's where one party, typically the greater party, initiates the bond, defines the mutual obligations, and secures specific promises.
So it's not just swapping goods.
No, not at all. It is a profound pledging of persons.
Okay, so if it's not a corporate merger or a car loan, what is the best mental model for you listening to actually grasp this?
That's a great question.
Because I'm trying to picture it. Is it closer to like a mafia loyalty oath mixed with a marriage vow?
That is actually a remarkably accurate way to synthesize it.
Really?
A mafia marriage.
Yeah. It has the intense life-and-death loyalty demands of a mafia blood oath, but it also has the intimate, relational, two-becoming-one depth of a marriage.
That is wild.
It is. But to really understand the mechanics of this, we have to pull back. We need to look at the geopolitical dirt of the ancient Near East.
Set the scene for us.
So we are talking about the second millennium BCE. This
Huh.
is a world long before international law.
Right. No Geneva Conventions back then. No, none of that. It is a brutal, chaotic landscape. It's dominated by tribal groups, small city-states, and massive predatory imperial powers.
Like the Hittites.
Yes, the Hittites and later the Assyrians.
So it's a world where if you are a small, weak city-state, you are just constantly terrified.
You're terrified of being invaded, plundered, or just completely wiped off the map.
Yeah. Survival was basically the ultimate commodity.
Precisely. So how did a small kingdom survive in that environment?
They made friends with the big guys.
Exactly. They entered into a treaty with a superpower. And the strongest archaeological evidence we have for understanding biblical covenants comes from these ancient Near Eastern treaties.
The source text mentions something specific here, right? Hittite suzerainty treaties.
Yes. Hittite suzerainty treaty.
Okay, let's break that word down. Suzerainty meaning a dynamic between a dominant overlord, the suzerain, and a lesser subservient kingdom.
The vassal, yes. A powerful emperor, the suzerain, annexes or protects a lesser king, the vassal.
And they bind themselves together?
Right. And what's fascinating is that the archaeological parallels between the structure of these ancient political documents and the covenants in the Bible, well, they're staggering.
They follow a specific formula, don't they?
A very rigid, specific formula.
Let's break down that formula. For you listening, think of this as the actual paperwork of the ancient world. How did a Hittite emperor draft a treaty?
It generally unfolds in 5 distinct stages. First, you have the preamble.
Okay, preamble. What's in that?
The great king introduces himself with all his titles. He'll say something like, I am the great king, king of the Hittites, the valiant.
So just establishing absolute authority right out of the gate.
Exactly. Then comes stage 2, the historical prologue. And this is crucial.
What is crucial?
Because the great king recounts all the benevolent things he has done for the vassal in the past.
Oh, I see.
It's essentially him saying, hey, remember when that other empire tried to burn your city down and I sent my chariots to save you?
Or remember how I elevated you to the throne?
Yes. It establishes a foundation of deep gratitude.
So it's basically the you owe me your life clause.
That's exactly what it is.
Right.
Then you move to stage 3, which are the stipulations,
The rules.
the rules of the relationship.
Yeah.
And the primary rule, always, is absolute undivided loyalty.
Meaning what, practically?
The vassal cannot make side alliances with Egypt or Babylon. They must answer the suzerain's call to war.
And they have to pay tribute, right?
Oh, always paying tribute.
Okay, so we've got the preamble, the prologue, and the stipulations. What comes next in the paperwork?
The sanctions. This is the list of blessings and curses.
Oh, this is the scary part.
Very scary. If the vassal remains loyal, the great king promises to protect them, to bless their land, to ensure their prosperity.
But if they rebel?
If the vassal rebels or withholds tribute, the curses are explicitly laid out, and it is horrifying stuff.
Like what?
Like, may the gods grind your bones like flour. May your cities be salted. May your land be barren.
Wow, they really didn't hold back.
No, they wanted to inspire terror. And finally, the 5th stage is the invocation of witnesses.
Witnesses? Like signing a modern contract with a notary.
Kind of, but in the ancient world, they would call upon the gods of both nations. They'd call on the mountains, the rivers, the heavens, and the earth to serve as witnesses to the oath.
Okay, so if you are an ancient Israelite living in a world completely saturated by these political survival treaties, right?
Yeah, this is just the air they breathed.
And then you encounter the God of the Bible, you're naturally mapping this known diplomatic structure onto your theology.
You can't help but do it.
But here is the massive question from the source material. Did the biblical authors just plagiarize the Hittite treaty format?
That's a huge debate.
Like, did they just copy-paste the paperwork of their neighbors, white out the name of the Hittite emperor, and write in Yahweh?
The archaeological and theological consensus is fascinating here. The relationship is not a direct plagiarized copy.
Okay, so what is it?
It is analogical. It's deeply theological. The biblical authors, under divine inspiration, they're taking a very familiar cultural framework, the ultimate expression of power and loyalty in their day.
Right.
And they are radically subverting it for a divine purpose.
Okay, subverting it. How so? Where does it deviate from the ancient norm?
Think about the polytheistic environment of the ancient Near East.
Okay, lots of gods.
Right. If you were a farmer in that era, you believe the world is run by a chaotic pantheon of unpredictable gods.
You have a god for the rain, a god for fertility, a god for the underworld.
Yes, and your entire religious life is just trying to appease them so they don't destroy your crops.
You're just constantly hedging your bets.
Exactly. You sacrifice to the rain god, but you also sacrifice to the sun god, just in case.
It's essentially cosmic extortion.
That's a great way to put it.
You are just paying protection money to various spiritual mob bosses.
But the biblical covenant completely shatters that worldview. The Lord demands a total monopoly on loyalty.
A monopoly. So no hedging your bets.
None. He is not one God among many asking for a cut of the crops. He is the sovereign creator claiming exclusive allegiance.
So he demands absolute rejection of idolatry.
Yes. And even more radically, he demands ethical holiness.
Ethical holiness. Explain how that differs from the neighbors.
Well, in the ancient world, the gods didn't really care how you treated your neighbor.
As long as you paid up.
Right. As long as you kept the temple sacrifices flowing, the gods didn't care if you were cruel. But the God of the Bible ties the covenant directly to social justice.
Meaning the rules of this covenant aren't just like private spiritual feelings, they dictate actual societal behavior.
Deeply so. The covenantal legislation governed agrarian life. It structured the household.
Like how you handled debt.
Yes, how you handled a neighbor's debt, land ownership, inheritance, and critically, the care of the widow and the orphan.
So it wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a comprehensive architectural plan for a totally distinct society.
A completely ethically holy society.
Okay. Knowing this intense background for you listening, that a covenant is this life and death loyalty oath that reshapes every atom of your society, let's actually trace this timeline.
Let's do it.
How does God initiate this relationship with a broken humanity? Let's turn to the very beginning of the biblical narrative.
Right to Genesis.
Starting with the first major milestone in the text, the Noahic covenant.
Yes. If we trace the canonical flow in the book of Genesis, we see the creation of the world, the tragic fall of humanity, and then a really rapid, sickening descent into profound corruption.
The text describes a world absolutely saturated with pervasive violence, right?
It does. And the flood is framed as the ultimate divine judgment. It's basically a decreation of a ruined world.
But then immediately following the flood, in Genesis chapter 6 and 9, God establishes this covenant with Noah.
Yep.
And the primary function of this covenant seems to be preservation. God is hitting the reboot button, but he's also putting a safeguard in place.
He is. And what is most vital for our understanding of the Noahic covenant is its scope and its mechanism.
Okay, let's talk about the scope first.
The scope is universal. It is made not just with Noah, but with all flesh, all future generations.
And the animals, right?
Yes, and the earth itself.
Yeah.
And the mechanism is completely unilateral.
Unilateral. Meaning God makes the promise, and humanity doesn't really have to sign anything.
Exactly. They don't have to do anything or achieve any level of morality to keep the deal intact.
So God essentially binds himself.
He does. He promises never again to destroy all flesh by a flood. He guarantees the stability of world history.
He promises that as long as the earth remains, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
And theologians actually have a specific term for this. They call it common grace.
Let's unpack that term for the listener, common grace, because normally when I hear the word grace, I usually think of salvation or, forgiveness of sins.
Right, saving grace.
Yeah. How does common grace function differently?
Common grace is the baseline preservation of the created order. It is the unmerited favor God shows to all people, regardless of their moral standing.
Or their relationship to him.
Exactly. It's the reason the sun rises on the evil and the good, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Okay, so the Noahic covenant secures this stable stage.
It establishes the sanctity of human life and institutes basic societal order to just hold back the chaos of human violence.
And the sign of this unconditional promise is the rainbow.
Yes. It's a divine weapon, right? A bow hung in the clouds, pointed away from the earth.
Pointed away from us. That's a great image. Okay, so Noah receives this incredibly broad, universal, totally unconditional promise. God is literally saying, I am going to keep the theater from burning down.
Right, the stage is secure.
But then, just a few chapters later in Genesis, the narrative zooms way in on one specific man from ancient Mesopotamia, Abraham.
And the entire vibe of the relationship changes.
It's a massive shift, isn't it?
It is. We move from the preservation of the world to the election of a specific people.
Wait, let me make sure I'm really wrapping my head around this. With Noah, God gives a free pass. He just says, I will sustain the earth, no strings attached.
Right, unilateral.
But with Abraham, God calls this guy out of his homeland, demands he leave everything he knows, and promises him three massive things.
Land, seed, and blessing.
Right. Land, seed, meaning countless offspring,
Yeah.
and that his family will be a vehicle for global blessing.
A huge promise.
But the demands placed on Abraham are staggering. God requires the physical sign of circumcision,
Yes.
and eventually, he tests Abraham to the absolute limit by commanding him to sacrifice his own promised son, Isaac.
It's intense.
How does that track? How do we reconcile a God who gives universal, unconditional preservation to Noah with a God who demands a highly specific, grueling, active faith from Abraham?
It is a brilliant tension to point out, and it's a debate that scholars have wrestled with for centuries.
So how does the source material resolve it?
To reconcile it, we have to look at the distinct redemptive roles these covenants are playing. We established that the Noahic covenant is the stable stage. It is common grace.
Right.
But the Abrahamic covenant is the initiation of special saving grace. It is the beginning of the play itself.
God is creating a specific, set-apart people to be the instrument of rescue for the rest of the world.
Exactly. Now, regarding your point about it feeling conditional versus unconditional, this is where we have to look closely at Genesis chapter 15.
Oh, this is the blood path scene I mentioned at the very beginning of the show.
Yes. Abraham is having a crisis of belief.
Because he's old, right?
He is old, he has no heir, and he asks God for assurance that he will actually inherit this massive promise.
So God tells him to get some animals.
He tells him to take a heifer, a female goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. Abraham cuts the animals in half and lays the pieces opposite each other.
He is literally setting up the ancient Near Eastern loyalty oath we talked about earlier. He's preparing for the suzerain and the vassal to walk the blood path.
But look at the mechanism of what actually happens in the text. As the sun goes down, a terrifying darkness falls over Abraham.
Okay.
God puts him into a deep sleep. He is completely immobilized. He cannot walk the path.
Wow. Okay.
And then a smoking firepot and a flaming torch pass between the severed pieces of the animals.
And those are symbols of the divine presence, right?
Yes. Theologians call it a theophany. God alone walks the path of the curse.
That is staggering. God is essentially saying, may I be torn apart if this covenant fails?
Exactly. He takes the entire burden of the curse upon himself. The vassal is asleep. The suzerain takes the full weight of the oath.
It is the ultimate display of unilateral grace.
It is. The foundation of the Abrahamic covenant is an unconditional divine promise. God stakes his own immortal life on the fact that he will deliver the land, the seed, and the blessing.
But hold on, if the foundation is totally unconditional grace, why all the intense requirements later?
That's the tension.
Why the circumcision in chapter 17? Why the ultimate test with Isaac in chapter 22?
Because while the foundation is an unconditional promise, historical covenant faithfulness still matters.
I see.
The promise cannot be broken by God, but the human partner is required to respond to that grace with active, obedient loyalty.
So Abraham's obedience didn't earn the promise.
No, the promise was given as a free gift while he was asleep, but his obedience was the necessary historical outworking of his faith in that promise.
And this is where the concept of faith becomes so practical for you listening today, trying to understand how this ancient theology applies to your actual life.
Definitely.
There is a specific verse, Genesis 15.6, that says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. He was justified by faith.
A foundational verse.
What does that kind of faith actually look like in the dirt of human experience?
Faith, in this covenantal framework, is fundamentally about trusting the character of the promise maker before there is any visible evidence of fulfillment.
Trusting before you see it.
Yes. Abraham is asked to trust in a son he does not have, an inheritance he cannot see, and a future he cannot control, based purely on the reliability of the God who walked through the blood path.
So faith isn't just like intellectual assent, it is a whole life reorientation based on a divine promise.
Beautifully said.
So God has secured the stage with Noah. He has selected the actors and made the foundational promise with Abraham. Fast forward several centuries.
A lot happens.
A lot happens. Abraham's family has grown into a sprawling multitude, but they are enslaved in Egypt.
Right.
God miraculously liberates them, crushing the Egyptian empire, and leads them into the wilderness. But a liberated mob of former slaves is not a functional nation.
No, they are disorganized and traumatized.
How does this sprawling family organize into a society that can actually reflect the holiness of the God who rescued them?
This leads us perfectly into the Mosaic or Sinaitic covenant.
We are now positioned at the base of Mount Sinai in the late 2nd millennium BCE.
The Israelites have just experienced the Exodus, which is really the defining redemptive event of the Old Testament.
The Mosaic covenant is established here, detailed across Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and later renewed in Deuteronomy.
Yes.
If the Abrahamic covenant was about family and promise, this feels entirely different to me. This feels like a national constitution.
That is a highly functional analogy. It establishes their national identity, their moral order, and their civic framework.
And at the core of this constitution is the Decalogue, right? The Ten Commandments.
Yes, but it expands into a massive covenant code that dictates their civil laws, their agricultural practices, and their intricate worship system.
I want to pause here and address a major interpretive tension from the source text.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I am an ancient Israelite standing in the dust at Sinai, listening to this massive list of laws, it comes with terrifying strings attached.
Very terrifying.
If you read Deuteronomy, there are incredible blessings promised for obedience, but horrific, nightmarish curses promised for disobedience.
Right. Famine, disease, exile.
Yeah. If they break the law, they get kicked out of the land. So I have to ask, is Sinai a covenant of grace or a covenant of strict conditionality?
That's the big question.
Because if they have to obey all these laws flawlessly just to stay in the promised land, doesn't that entirely cancel out the grace of being chosen in the first place?
It is the most common modern misconception of the Old Testament.
Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
people assume the Israelites had to perfectly obey the law in order to earn their salvation.
That's definitely how it reads sometimes.
But if we look at the actual mechanism of the text, the answer to your question is that it is both gracious and conditional. And understanding the sequence is everything.
Sequence. Okay, unpack that sequence.
The theological consensus is clear. Grace always precedes obligation. Look at the timeline of the Exodus.
Okay, the timeline.
God did not march into the slave camps of Egypt, hand the Israelites a stone tablet with the 10 Commandments, and say, if you can manage to keep these rules perfectly for the next 6 months, I will consider rescuing you.
Right. They were trapped, impoverished slaves. They had no capacity to earn a rescue.
Exactly. He rescued them first. He dismantled the geopolitical superpower of Egypt, parted the sea, and brought them to the mountain entirely out of his free grace.
Based on his prior promise to Abraham.
Yes, the redemption was an absolute unmerited gift.
So where do all the rules come in then?
Once they are redeemed, they are brought into a formal constitutional relationship.
Ah, I see.
The law is not a ladder they climb to achieve salvation. It is the instruction manual for how to live as a saved, holy people in the very presence of a holy God.
However, the administration of that relationship, specifically their ability to enjoy the blessings and actually remain in the geographic promised land that depends heavily on their obedient loyalty.
Yes, it does.
So obedience isn't how you purchase the relationship, it's the required response to the relationship.
Beautifully put.
But why were the penalties so severe? Why the terrifying curses in Deuteronomy? This brings up something crucial from the text: the honor-shame dynamics of the ancient world.
We really view laws through a modern, Western, individualistic lens.
Yeah, totally. Like if I speed on the highway and get a ticket, I pay my fine, and it doesn't affect my neighbor at all.
Right, it's an individual legal infraction.
Right.
But in the ancient Near East, covenant infidelity was not just a legal technicality, it was corporate disgrace.
Corporate disgrace. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It means that if a family in the tribe of Judah decides to start worshiping a Canaanite fertility idol, they are not just expressing a private religious preference.
They're committing treason.
Exactly. They are committing treason against the suzerain king who rescued them from slavery. And because the society is organically linked, their treason brings a curse upon the entire community.
It brings drought to their neighbors' crops. It brings vulnerability to the whole nation.
Yes. To break the covenant was to bring deep existential shame upon the community and to publicly defame the name of the God who claimed them.
Which perfectly explains why the zeal for purity and the punishments seem so incredibly intense to us.
They were fighting for their communal survival.
And there is a subset of the Sinai experience that illustrates this perfectly: the priestly covenant.
Yes, we find this in Numbers 25 and Leviticus 26.
The focus here is on the tribe of Levi, specifically Aaron and his descendant Phinehas.
The central function of the priestly covenant is sacred mediation.
Sacred mediation. Walk us through that.
Think about the physical layout of the Israelite camp.
Yeah.
You have millions of deeply flawed, rebellious human beings.
Right.
And dwelling quite literally in the center of their camp, in the tabernacle, is the manifest, lethal holiness of the creator of the universe.
Lethal holiness. That's a strong way to describe it.
It was. So how does a sinful people live in the immediate proximity of absolute holiness without being incinerated?
You need a buffer zone. You need mediators.
You need the priesthood. And the story of Phinehas in Numbers 25 is really the defining narrative for this.
Remind me of that story.
The Israelites are falling into gross public idolatry and sexual immorality with the Moabites. They are flagrantly violating the core stipulations of the covenant.
So they're breaking the treaty.
Big time. And a plague breaks out among the people. The covenant curses are being activated.
And Phinehas steps in.
Phinehas, a priest, takes a spear and violently executes an Israelite man and a Midianite woman who are openly defying the law.
And because of this violent zeal, the plague stops. And God grants Phinehas a covenant of perpetual priesthood. If you are listening to this right now in the 21st century, that story probably sounds like the textbook definition of religious extremism.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like a horrific act of zealotry that we spend all our modern political energy trying to suppress. How are we supposed to interpret that?
Again, we have to step out of our modern individualistic shoes and look at the mechanism of ancient purity and survival.
Okay, frame it for us.
Within the narrative, Phinehas is not acting as a vigilante. He is acting as the authorized guardian of the covenant.
Because sin wasn't just a bad habit.
Right. In the ancient mind, sin was an actual pollutant. It was a miasma that stuck to the camp, defiled the land, and provoked the consuming fire of God's justice.
So Phinehas's action was essentially an emergency quarantine protocol to stop a lethal infection from wiping out the entire nation.
That is exactly what it was. And it highlights the broader mechanism of the priesthood.
Yeah.
The blood sacrifices.
Right, the animal sacrifices.
When an animal was sacrificed, the blood was used as a ceremonial detergent. It was splashed on the altar to cleanse the pollution of sin from the community.
Ensuring that God's holy presence could remain among them without destroying them.
Exactly. The priesthood sustained the covenant order.
Okay, let's check our map here for you listening. God has rescued the family, given them a constitution, established a priesthood to handle their pollution, and they enter the promised land.
A lot of progress.
But a collection of tribes governed by judges and priests isn't stable enough to survive the geopolitical meat grinder of the ancient Near East.
They were constantly being attacked.
They need a centralized defender. They need a king. And this leads us to the Davidic covenant.
We are now moving into the era of the united monarchy, specifically 2 Samuel chapter 7.
Set the stage for David here.
David has become king. He has finally secured Jerusalem, defeated their surrounding enemies, and he is resting in his beautiful cedar palace.
Sounds nice.
It is. But he looks out the window, sees the tabernacle, the tent where the Ark of the Covenant is kept, and he thinks, it's not right that I live in a palace while God lives in a tent.
I am going to build a permanent, magnificent house, like a temple, for the Lord.
Right. It sounds like an incredibly noble, pious ambition.
It does. But God responds through the prophet Nathan and completely flips the script.
He really does. God essentially says, you are not going to build me a house of bricks. I'm going to build you a house.
But he is playing with the word house here.
Yes, he means a dynasty.
A permanent royal lineage.
Exactly. God promises to cement a messianic kingship. He says of David's future descendant, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son.
He promises that David's throne, his kingdom, and his house will be established forever. This is the Davidic covenant.
It shifts the theological focus entirely toward kingdom permanence and royal sonship.
So the king becomes the representative head of the entire nation. His faithfulness determines the nation's blessing, and his failure brings the nation's ruin.
That's the heavy burden of the crown.
You know, I was looking at the archaeological record for this specific era, and there is a discovery called the Tel Dan inscription that absolutely blew my mind regarding this Davidic dynasty.
Oh, the Tel Dan stele. It is one of the most vital archaeological discoveries for biblical historians.
That's what it is exactly.
It's a shattered Aramaic stone slab from the 9th century BCE, discovered in northern Israel. It was commissioned by an enemy king, likely Hazael of Aram, boasting about his military victories.
And what does he explicitly boast about?
The inscription specifically claims that he killed the king of Israel and the king of the house of David.
That is massive.
It really is.
Because the enemies of Israel didn't just know them as some random neighboring country. They recognized their leadership internationally by this specific dynastic title, the House of David.
It proves that the historical memory of this covenant promise was deeply entrenched, not just in the Bible, but in the geopolitical reality of the time.
It grounds the biblical narrative in immense historical plausibility. The Davidic promise was the defining identity of the southern kingdom.
Yes, it was.
But this incredible promise of permanence makes the next stage of the story almost unbearably agonizing.
Because the story drives right off a cliff.
It really does. The monarchy eventually divides into a northern and southern kingdom. The kings fail, generation after generation, falling into horrific idolatry and social injustice.
Breaking the covenant over and over.
Right. Then comes the geopolitical nightmare. The Assyrian Empire wipes out the northern tribes. And then the ultimate catastrophe, the Babylonian crisis in 586 BCE.
The darkest moment in their history.
The armies of Babylon lay siege to Jerusalem. The city is starved. The walls are breached. The magnificent temple is burned to the ground.
Everything is destroyed.
The Davidic king has his eyes gouged out and is dragged off in bronze chains. And the people are death-marched into exile in Babylon.
It's just total devastation.
If I am a Jewish exile sitting in the dust of Babylon, weeping by the rivers, experiencing the total annihilation of my society, I am looking at the Davidic covenant, and I am asking a very dangerous question.
Did God lie?
Exactly. Did God lie? He promised David an eternal throne, he promised security, and now the throne is ash, and we are slaves again. It feels like a catastrophic breach of contract.
It is the most profound theological and psychological crisis in the history of Israel.
How do they even process it?
Well, the book of Psalms captures this exact agony. Psalm 89 is a raw, devastated processing of this reality.
What does it say?
The psalmist recounts the glorious promises made to David and then abruptly pivots to the destruction. He cries out, "Where is your steadfast love of old, which by your faithfulness you swore to David? You have renounced the covenant with your servant."
The cognitive dissonance is deafening. You said forever, and it ended in blood and fire.
It's hard to read, honestly.
So what's the answer? How do they make sense of it?
This is precisely why the prophets, figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea, are so crucial to the canonical spine.
They step into the wreckage of the exile to provide the covenantal diagnosis.
Yes. And their diagnosis is not that God's promise failed.
Right, it's that Israel failed.
It's that Israel's internal rebellion was so toxic, so deeply entrenched, that the covenant sanctions those terrifying curses from Deuteronomy. They had to be enforced. Justice demanded it.
But the prophets don't just use sterile legal language to explain this, do they? They use imagery that is devastatingly intimate.
They do. They shift from the language of suzerain and vassal to the language of husband and wife.
God is the faithful, tender husband.
And Israel is the treacherous, wandering wife. They frame the nation's idolatry not merely as a breach of contract, but as adultery.
Why does that distinction matter? Why use marital imagery?
Because a breached contract causes financial loss, but adultery causes a broken heart.
Wow, yeah.
It reveals the deeply personal, relational grief of God. The exile is the ultimate tragic consequence of a broken relationship.
It is the enforcement of God's justice, giving them over to the foreign gods they desired so much.
Yes, but the prophets don't leave them in the ashes.
Right, they offer hope.
Even in the darkest moments of the exile, the prophets preserve the eschatological hope, the future expectation.
They declare that human kings will inevitably fail, but the Davidic covenant survives the judgment.
It transforms into an expectation for a righteous branch, a true future Messiah who will finally sit on David's throne, perfectly obey the law, and restore the people.
Which brings us to a terrifying realization about the human condition, doesn't it?
It really does.
The entire arc from Sinai to the exile proves something we still struggle to admit today. External rules cannot fix internal rebellion.
They just can't.
You can give humanity the most perfect laws carved on stone by the finger of God. You can give them a pristine land, a beautiful temple, a holy priesthood, and a royal king, and we will still find a way to blow it.
Because the flaw isn't in the system.
The flaw is in us, which forces the ultimate question for you listening. If the problem is our internal rebellion, what is the ultimate mechanism of rescue?
And this brings us to the New Covenant.
Let's look at the incredible promises in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36.
The prophets are speaking to a broken, exiled people who have entirely lost their capacity to obey. And Jeremiah delivers this unprecedented promise from God. He says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers, my covenant that they broke."
Let's isolate the fundamental difference here. What is the actual mechanism of this new covenant?
The difference is the location of the law.
The location.
In the Mosaic covenant, the law was objective, external, written on tablets of stone. It told you what to do, but it gave you no power to do it.
Okay, so what about the new covenant?
In the new covenant, God says, "I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts."
Ezekiel 36 expands on this profoundly too, doesn't it?
It does. God promises, "I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes."
You know, this reminds me of the difference between wearing a high-tech fitness tracker and receiving an actual heart transplant.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Because the Old Covenant, the Law of Moses, is like the world's most accurate fitness tracker.
It gives you flawless, objective data about your condition.
Exactly. It tells you exactly how many steps you missed, how elevated your blood pressure is, how completely out of shape you are. It diagnoses the problem perfectly.
But the tracker itself cannot make you run a marathon.
No, it just exposes your inability to do it. The new covenant is God basically saying, I am not just giving you a stricter tracker, I am taking you into surgery.
A spiritual surgery.
Yeah. I am removing your dead, unresponsive heart of stone. I am transplanting a new, healthy heart that actually wants to beat. And I am putting my own breath, my spirit, into your lungs to power the run.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
If you are listening to this, I want you to think about how massive a paradigm shift this is for human spirituality. We are moving from external compliance, trying to white-knuckle your way through a list of rules to avoid a curse, to internal transformation.
Where the very desire to obey is miraculously placed inside of you.
And coupled with that internal transformation is definitive, permanent forgiveness, right?
Yes. Under the Old Covenant, the sacrifices had to be repeated daily, year after year, because the blood of bulls and goats could only temporarily cover the pollution.
It was just a holding pattern.
Exactly. But in Jeremiah 31, God promises, "I will forgive their iniquity and I will remember their sin no more."
But how is this new covenant actually ratified? Because as we learned with Abraham and the blood path, an ancient covenant requires blood. It requires a life to secure the oath.
So where does this canonical spine reach its climax?
Right, where does it go?
The trajectory points directly into the New Testament. It finds its absolute fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
The source material highlights a critical moment in Luke 22 during the Last Supper, right?
Yes. Jesus is sitting with his disciples the night before his crucifixion. He takes the cup of wine and he says, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood."
By using those specific words, he is explicitly claiming to be the fulfillment of Jeremiah's ancient prophecy.
He's saying, the heart transplant is happening and my death is the surgery.
Wow. And the author of the book of Hebrews, specifically in chapters 8 through 10, builds a massive, intricate theological argument around this exact claim.
The argument is that Jesus is the final, perfect mediator.
Superior to Moses.
Yes, superior to Moses, who only brought the external law. And he is a high priest, superior to Aaron and Phinehas.
Because he doesn't offer the blood of an animal. He offers his own life.
Exactly. His death on the cross is the once-for-all, definitive sacrifice that absorbs the curse of the broken law and ratifies the new covenant permanently.
I want to dive into the original language here, because understanding the Greek translation unlocks a really beautiful layer of this for the listener.
Yes, the linguistics are fascinating here.
In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for covenant is berit. We defined that earlier as an oath-bound relationship. But when the New Testament writers composed their texts in Greek, what word did they select?
They use the Greek word diatheke.
Diatheke, okay.
And what is so fascinating about this choice is that while diatheke can mean a treaty or covenant, in the broader Greco-Roman world of the first century, it was most commonly used as a legal term for a last will and testament.
A document dictating inheritance.
Yes. Like a modern last will and testament you'd sign with a lawyer.
Okay, and the writer of Hebrews leans heavily into this dual meaning, don't they?
Very heavily. Think about how a will works. A wealthy person can write a will promising you millions of dollars. But as long as that person is alive, you don't see a dime.
The will only goes into effect The inheritance is only distributed when the person who wrote it dies.
Exactly. So the death of Jesus is the triggering event.
Christ's death enacts the diathek.
It triggers the last will and testament, legally distributing the inheritance.
Versus what, exactly?
Permanent forgiveness, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and eternal life, all given to his people.
If you read the New Testament closely, this creates a really interesting dynamic regarding how Christians view the Old Testament. Is this new covenant a total replacement of the old?
That's a common assumption.
Because a very common modern bias is to think, well, the God of the Old Testament was angry, obsessed with blood and rules, and then Jesus showed up, tore up the old contract, and just preached love.
Right, the idea that Jesus was rebelling against the God of the Old Testament.
Did Jesus take the Old Testament and put it in a shredder?
The theological consensus of the text is adamant. Evangelical theology stresses fulfillment, not replacement.
Fulfillment, not replacement.
The New Covenant does not abandon the Old Testament framework. It is the grand climax of it. Jesus is not a rebel tearing down the old system.
He is the final puzzle piece that makes the entire sprawling picture finally make sense.
Beautifully said. He is the true, faithful seed of Abraham who brings blessing to all nations.
He is the ultimate son of David who inherits the eternal throne.
And he is the greater Moses. The New Testament is not a retreat from the Old Testament. It is the realization of what the entire canonical spine was pointing toward all along.
The covenants are not competing arrangements. They are interlocking stages of one massive, unified, redemptive mission.
Exactly.
Okay, we have traced this incredible sweeping arc from a global flood to a blood path in the ancient Near East, to the thunder of Mount Sinai, the devastating collapse of a monarchy in Babylon, and finally to a renewed human heart in Christ.
It's quite a journey.
But we need to land the plane. How does this multi-millennial theological framework actually intersect with the dirt of our lives today?
Because we don't study these covenants simply as a historical curiosity or an academic exercise?
No, the concepts embedded in these ancient texts challenge the very fabric of how we organize our modern world and how we relate to one another.
Let's bring this right into the modern living room.
Sociologists observe that we live in a culture characterized by contractual fragility and what they call expressive individualism.
Yes, two very prominent modern concepts.
And I think anyone listening feels this every single day. Today, almost every relationship feels like a fragile, consumer-driven arrangement.
Very transactional.
Whether it's an employment contract, a self-fund plan, or tragically, often our marriages and friendships, you opt in as long as you are getting a positive return on your investment, as long as it's fulfilling your personal desires.
And the very second it becomes difficult, or you aren't perfectly happy, you opt out. You cancel the subscription.
How does the biblical concept of covenant confront that fragile way of living? Specifically, I want to look at a Hebrew word that scholars associate deeply with covenant. Fast.
Pased is perhaps one of the most magnificent words in the entire biblical vocabulary.
What does it mean?
It translates roughly to steadfast love, covenant loyalty, or merciful fidelity.
Merciful fidelity. I love that.
It describes the profound, enduring, stubborn love that God shows to his people, a love that persists even when the people fail miserably.
And the biblical argument is that true human flourishing, our actual psychological, emotional, and social well-being, depends entirely on this kind of faithful promise-keeping, not merely on ongoing consent or consumer satisfaction.
Right. So a relationship built on Hesed survives the Tuesday morning when you wake up and simply don't feel like being in the relationship anymore.
It survives the failure.
Yes. And the sociological takeaway from this is stabilizing. The concept of covenant resists two of the most destructive modern extremes.
And those are atomization and authoritarianism. Let's break those down for the listener. What is the threat of atomization?
Atomization is the natural end result of expressive individualism.
Okay.
It is the idea that we are all just isolated, floating atoms bumping into each other, making temporary alliances solely for mutual benefit and breaking them when they are no longer useful.
It creates a desperately lonely, fragile, anxiety-ridden society.
A covenant asserts the exact opposite. It says we belong to one another because we are bound by sacred promises. We are an organically linked community, a family, not just a collection of consumers.
And what about authoritarianism? How does an ancient loyalty oath protect against that?
Authoritarianism is the opposite extreme. The idea that humans are merely subjects to be controlled by raw power, dominated by a state, a tyrant, or an ideology.
But remember the structure of the covenant. It asserts that all human power is morally accountable before the ultimate suzerain king.
Think of the prophets standing before corrupt kings in Israel, pointing their fingers and saying, "You are breaking the covenant by crushing the poor."
Covenant frames public justice. It dictates that the king is under the exact same moral law as the poorest peasant. It is a massive check on tyranny.
Yes, it means that true freedom isn't the absence of boundaries or the ability to do whatever you want.
True freedom is found in the security of a faithful, unbreakable promise. Think about how this transforms personal discipleship, counseling, or even how you treat your own family.
A covenantal worldview gives you robust, durable categories for loyalty, repentance, and forgiveness.
If my marriage is just a contract, the moment my spouse fails me or hurts me, the contract is breached, the terms are violated, and I am entirely justified in walking away.
Right, the deal is off.
But if my marriage is a covenant modeled on God's hesed, then failure isn't the end of the deal.
It's just the beginning of the work.
Failure is the excruciating but necessary opportunity for repentance and forgiveness, because the promise we made is deeper and stronger than our daily performance.
And that applies to church life, to friendships, to community building. It teaches us that spiritual and human life is fundamentally relational.
Your faith is not just a private project of self-actualization. It is your responsive trust to a God who walked the blood path for you.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have. To quickly summarize the journey for you listening, we have traced the canonical arc of the entire Bible. We saw the unconditional promise given to Abraham,
We saw the constitutional law given to Moses.
the permanent kingship promised to David. We felt the agonizing devastation of the exile caused by human rebellion.
We heard the prophetic promise of a new heart culminating in the arrival of the Messiah.
The final sacrifice, the outpouring of the Spirit, and the birth of the church. It is one incredible, meticulously unified story.
The major theological triumph of this narrative is that God does not merely issue behavioral commands from a safe, transcendent distance.
He binds himself. He gets into the historical dirt, the mess, and the betrayal with us.
He secures our redemption through his own sacrifice, fulfilling every broken promise in the person of Jesus Christ. That is the center of gravity for the entire text.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. It is drawn directly from the text section on eschatology, which is the theological study of the end of all things.
When we look at the final chapters of the Bible, Revelation 21 and 22, we see the ultimate hope of the covenant.
And what is staggering is that the final hope is not merely rescue from judgment. It is not just escaping a burning building or avoiding hell.
No, it's so much more than that.
The ultimate endgame of the universe is described as perfected covenant communion. It is God coming down to dwell fully with humanity. And the final refrain of the text is, I will be their God, and they shall be my people.
Perfect communion.
So I want to challenge you. If the ultimate endgame of the entire universe isn't just escaping punishment, but achieving a perfect, unbreakable, intimate communion with the creator of the cosmos. Wait, let me rephrase that.
How does it change things for us today?
Yeah. How does that alter the way you view the purpose of your own life, your daily struggles, and your relationships today? We started this deep dive talking about a terrifying blood path and a world where agreements were held together by fear and curses.
But when you put on the lens of the covenant, when you trace this blueprint from Genesis to Revelation, you don't just see a skeletal list of cold, ancient laws.
You see the heartbeat of a God who binds himself to his people, absorbs the curse himself, and refuses to let us go no matter the cost. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.